My name is Claudia, and I am 54 years old. For 7 years, I cared for my mother-in-law like she was my own mother. I bathed her, fed her, held her hand through countless sleepless nights. While I was doing all of that, my husband was building a new life with someone else. But Eleanor saw everything, and she had a plan I never knew about until the day her will was read. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop a comment below with your location. If you have ever given everything to someone who did not appreciate your sacrifice, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What I'm about to tell you changed my entire life. I met Douglas 28 years ago at Hartford General Hospital. I was a registered nurse working the night shift in the emergency department. He came in around 2 in the morning after a minor car accident. Nothing serious, just a few cuts on his forehead and a sprained wrist. But the way he looked at me when I cleaned his wounds made my heart skip. He was charming in a way I had never experienced before, confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard. He told me about his family business, Whitmore Furnishings, a company his grandfather had started back in the 1950s. His father had passed away a few years before, and his mother Eleanor was now the sole owner of everything. I came from a completely different world. My father was an electrician who worked 60-hour weeks to put food on the table. My mother stocked shelves at the local supermarket until her back gave out. We never had much, but we had love. I thought that was enough to build a life on. Douglas and I dated for about a year before he proposed. I still remember the night he got down on one knee in my tiny apartment kitchen. He said I was different from every woman he had ever known. He said I was real. I believed him with every fiber of my being. Our wedding was a modest affair compared to what the Whitmore family was used to. Eleanor attended polite but distant. I could tell she had reservations about her son marrying a nurse from a working-class family, but she never said anything cruel to my face. She simply observed, waiting to see what kind of woman I really was. Timothy was born 2 years into our marriage. I took 3 years off from nursing to raise him, and those were some of the happiest years of my life. Douglas was attentive back then, coming home early to help with diaper changes and midnight feedings. We were a team, or so I thought. When Timothy started preschool, I went back to nursing part-time. I wanted to contribute financially, but I also wanted to be there for my son. Douglas supported my decision, though. Looking back, I wonder if he even noticed how hard I worked to balance everything. Something shifted in my relationship with Eleanor during those years. She watched how I cared for Timothy, how I read him stories every night, how I made sure he ate his vegetables even when he cried. Slowly, her coldness thawed. She started calling me just to chat. She invited me to lunch without Douglas. She told me stories about her own mother, about the struggles of raising a child alone after her husband passed. By the time Timothy was 10, Eleanor and I had become genuinely close. She said I was the daughter she never had. Those words meant more to me than she could ever know. Douglas, meanwhile, was climbing the corporate ladder at Whitmore Furnishings. His father had left the company to Eleanor, not to Douglas directly. She made him CEO, but she retained 100% ownership of everything. The stocks, the properties, the bank accounts. All of it was in her name. Douglas never seemed bothered by this arrangement. He always said it was just a formality, that everything would come to him eventually when his mother passed. He spoke about it so casually, like Eleanor was just an obstacle between him and his inheritance. I should have paid more attention to how he talked about his own mother. The company was worth approximately $12 million, not including the family properties. There was the main mansion where Eleanor lived, plus 2 additional houses that were rented out for income. Douglas managed the day-to-day operations, but Eleanor still signed off on every major decision. She was sharp as a tack even as she got older. Then 7 years ago, everything changed. Eleanor was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at 75 years old. The doctors said it was still in the early stages, but there was no cure. We could only manage the symptoms and try to maintain her quality of life for as long as possible. Douglas immediately suggested hiring a full-time nurse to care for his mother. It made practical sense, but Eleanor refused. She said she did not want strangers in her home, touching her things, watching her deteriorate. She wanted family. I still remember the conversation Douglas and I had that night. He was frustrated pacing around our living room, complaining about how stubborn his mother was being. And then he looked at me with that expression I now recognize as manipulation disguised as affection. "What if you did it?" he said. "You are a nurse. You know how to handle this. Mom loves you. It would mean so much to her." I did not hesitate. I loved Eleanor, and the thought of her being cared for by indifferent strangers broke my heart. I agreed to quit my job and move into the mansion to take care of her full time. Douglas hugged me and said I was amazing. He said he did not deserve me. Looking back, that was probably the most honest thing he ever said. The first year of caring for Eleanor was challenging, but manageable. Her tremors were mild, and she could still walk with minimal assistance. We developed a routine together. I would help her bathe and dress each morning, prepare her meals, administer her medications, and keep her company throughout the day. But it was the nights that truly bonded us. Eleanor often could not sleep because of muscle stiffness and pain. I would sit beside her bed, reading aloud from her favorite novels. She loved Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters. Sometimes we would talk for hours about life, love, regret, and hope. She told me about her marriage to Douglas Sr. It had not been perfect. He had been unfaithful early in their marriage, a secretary at the company, ironically enough. Eleanor had discovered the affair and confronted him. He ended it, begged for forgiveness, and she stayed for the sake of their son. But she never fully trusted him again. "I carry that wound with me, even now," she confessed one night. "Forgiveness does not erase memory. It just teaches you how to live with the scar." I held her hand and listened. I had no idea those words would become my own truth years later. As Eleanor's condition progressed, my responsibilities grew heavier. By year 3, she needed help with almost everything: eating, bathing, using the bathroom. I learned to read her body, anticipating her needs before she could articulate them. I became her hands when hers would not stop shaking, her legs when hers refused to cooperate. Through all of this, Douglas visited less and less. In the beginning, he came every Sunday for dinner. Then it became every other week, then once a month. His excuses were always work-related: big contracts, important clients, expansion opportunities. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. When he did visit, he barely looked at his mother. He would peck her on the cheek, ask how she was feeling without waiting for an answer, then retreat to the study to make phone calls. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. One evening, after Douglas had left early, claiming an emergency at the office, Eleanor grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Is he treating you well?" she asked. Her eyes were sharp despite the fog of medication. "Of course," I said automatically. "We are just going through a busy season." She held my gaze for a long moment before releasing me. "Do not lie to protect him," she said quietly, "and do not lie to protect yourself either." I did not understand what she meant then. I convinced myself she was just being overprotective. Around the 4th year, Douglas hired a new executive assistant. Her name was Natalie, and she was 31 years old. He mentioned it casually over dinner one night, said she came highly recommended, very efficient, very professional. I thought nothing of it. Douglas had always had assistants. It was part of running a company. But then small things started to change. Douglas began working out at the gym before dawn. He bought new suits, updated his hairstyle, started wearing cologne I had never smelled before. When I complimented the changes, he shrugged and said he needed to look sharp for client meetings. Natalie started appearing in his work conversations. Natalie scheduled this meeting. Natalie handled that account. Natalie thinks we should expand into new markets. Her name was everywhere, like a ghost I could not see but could definitely feel. One afternoon, I was helping Eleanor with her physical therapy exercises when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Douglas had left it behind during his brief visit that morning. The screen lit up with a text message preview. I was not trying to snoop, but the words were right there. Miss you already. Cannot wait until Friday. The sender's name was simply N. My stomach dropped. I quickly looked away, pretending I had not seen anything, but Eleanor had seen it too. Our eyes met across the room. She said nothing. Neither did I. That night, after I helped Eleanor to bed, I lay awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling. My mind raced through every late night at the office, every canceled dinner, every distracted conversation. The pieces were forming a picture I desperately did not want to see, but I told myself I was overreacting. N could be anyone. A business partner, a client. I had no proof of anything. And even if I did, what would I do about it? Eleanor needed me. I could not abandon her over suspicions, so I buried my doubts and kept going. That was my first mistake. The truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you try to bury it. Last spring, Eleanor's health took a sharp decline. She was hospitalized 3 times in 2 months for respiratory complications. Each time I stayed by her side, around the clock, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, eating vending machine food, holding her hand through every test and procedure. During the second hospitalization, I called Douglas at 11 at night to update him on his mother's condition. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I called his office line thinking maybe he was working late. The security guard answered and said Mr. Whitmore had left at 5. I called our home landline. No answer. The next morning, Douglas appeared at the hospital looking disheveled. His hair was wet, and he was wearing clothes I did not recognize. When I asked where he had been all night, he said he fell asleep at the office working on quarterly reports. I knew he was lying. The security guard had already told me he left early, but I was too exhausted to confront him. Eleanor was struggling to breathe in the bed next to us, and my priority was keeping her alive. A few weeks later, after Eleanor was discharged and settled back home, Margaret asked to speak with me privately. Margaret had been Eleanor's housekeeper for over 20 years. She was a quiet woman in her 60s, fiercely loyal to the Whitmore family, especially to Eleanor. We sat in the kitchen while Eleanor napped upstairs. Margaret wrung her hands nervously before speaking. I did not want to be the one to tell you this, she began, but I cannot watch you suffer in ignorance any longer. She told me everything. Douglas and Natalie had been having an affair for nearly 2 years. The entire office knew about it. They had been seen together at restaurants, at hotels, even at industry events where Douglas introduced her as his colleague, but touched her like she was something more. Margaret had overheard Douglas on the phone once telling Natalie that he would leave me as soon as his mother passed. He was just waiting for the inheritance, he said. Then he would be free to start his new life. I sat there frozen, feeling like someone had poured ice water into my veins. All those years of sacrifice. All those nights I spent caring for his mother while he was with another woman. Every time he said he loved me, every kiss on the forehead, every thank you for being so wonderful. All of it was lies. But there was more. Margaret leaned closer and lowered her voice. Mrs. Whitmore knows, she said. She has known for months. She called her attorney several times recently. I do not know what they discussed, but she was very determined about something. I did not know how to process this information. Eleanor knew. She knew her son was betraying me, and she had not said anything. That night, I helped Eleanor with her evening routine in silence. My hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, while my mind churned with questions. As I was adjusting her pillows, Eleanor suddenly spoke. You know now, do you not? It was not a question. I nodded, unable to form words. I am sorry, she said. I am sorry my son turned out to be this kind of man. I thought I raised him better. I thought he learned from his father's mistakes instead of repeating them. Tears streamed down my face as I sat on the edge of her bed. She reached out with her trembling hand and wiped my cheek. I need you to trust me, she said firmly. Whatever happens, remember that I see you. I see everything you have done for this family, and I will make sure it is not forgotten. I did not understand what she meant, but I nodded anyway because I had no strength left to question anything. 2 days later, I confronted Douglas. He came home late as usual, expecting me to be at the mansion with Eleanor, but I had asked Margaret to watch over her for a few hours so I could have this conversation. Douglas looked surprised to see me sitting in our living room with the lights off. He flipped on the switch and started making excuses about a dinner meeting running late. I stopped him mid-sentence. "I know about Natalie." He froze. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, annoyance. Then something cold settled in his eyes. "What exactly do you think you know?" he asked. I told him what Margaret had shared. I told him about the phone calls. I had overheard the text messages, the lies about working late. I told him I knew he was just waiting for his mother to die so he could collect his inheritance and leave me. Douglas did not deny it. In fact, his demeanor shifted completely. The mask of the loving husband fell away, revealing a stranger I did not recognize. "Fine," he said flatly. "You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, I have been seeing Natalie. And yes, I love her. I have loved her for 2 years now. He blamed me for the affair. He said I had abandoned our marriage when I chose to care for his mother instead of focusing on us. He said I had become more like a nurse than a wife. He said Natalie made him feel alive again. Each word was a knife twisting deeper into my heart. And there is something else he added almost casually. Natalie is pregnant, 2 months along. The room tilted. I grabbed the arm of the sofa to steady myself. "I want a divorce," Douglas continued. "Once Mother passes, we will divide the assets and go our separate ways. You can keep the house. I do not care. I just want to start fresh." He said all of this like he was discussing a business transaction. Like 28 years of marriage meant nothing. Like I was just an item on a checklist to be dealt with. Douglas packed a suitcase that night and left. He did not ask about his mother. He did not ask how I was feeling. He just walked out the door without looking back. I sat alone in the darkness for hours, too numb to cry, too broken to move. The weeks that followed Douglas's departure were the hardest of my life, but I could not fall apart. Eleanor still needed me, and I refused to let her down, even when her own son had abandoned us both. Her condition worsened rapidly after Douglas left. It was as if her body finally gave up the fight once she knew her son's true nature. Dr. Hoffman visited more frequently, adjusting medications and preparing us for what he gently called the natural progression of the disease. I never told Eleanor that Douglas had left, but she figured it out on her own. He stopped visiting entirely, not even a phone call to check on her. One afternoon, she looked at me with those knowing eyes and simply said, "He is gone, is he not?" I nodded, and she closed her eyes with a heavy sigh. "I did not raise him to be this way," she whispered. "His father and I gave him everything. Maybe that was the problem. He never learned that love requires sacrifice." Despite her failing health, Eleanor remained remarkably lucid. She called for attorney Raymond Porter multiple times over the following weeks. Each meeting lasted at least an hour, sometimes longer. I was always asked to leave the room during these conversations. After one particularly long session, I saw Raymond shaking Eleanor's hand with unusual formality. His expression was serious but satisfied, like they had just concluded important business. I asked Margaret if she knew what was happening. She shook her head, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or perhaps vindication. Later that evening, Eleanor called me to her bedside. "Sit with me," she said, patting the space next to her. I sat down, taking her frail hand in mine. "I need to tell you something," she began. Something about my own marriage that I never shared with anyone except Raymond. She told me about the early years with Douglas Sr., how she discovered his affair with his secretary, how she confronted him and he begged for forgiveness, how she stayed because of little Douglas, only 8 years old at the time. "But I never forgot," she said, "and I never fully trusted him again. When he died, I grieved for the man he could have been more than the man he actually was." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I do not want you to make my mistake, Claudia. I stayed and swallowed my pain for decades. You are still young enough to have a different life. I tried to protest to say that my situation was different, but she shook her head. Let me finish. Whatever happens after I am gone, I want you to know that you have been more of a daughter to me than my own son has been a son. You have given me 7 years of love and care that I can never repay. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate pearl bracelet that I recognized from old family photographs. This belonged to my mother, she said, and her mother before that. It was supposed to go to my daughter, but I never had one. Until you came along. I wept as she clasped the bracelet around my wrist. Keep this close, she said. And when the time comes, remember what I said. Trust me. 2 weeks later, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was holding her hand when she took her final breath. The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the antique clock on her nightstand. I sat with her body for almost an hour before calling anyone. I needed that time to say goodbye, to thank her for everything she had given me, to promise that I would honor her memory. When I finally called Douglas, his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message telling him his mother was gone. He arrived at the mansion nearly an hour later, looking more inconvenienced than grieved. The funeral was held 4 days later at the church Eleanor had attended her entire life. It was a modest service, just as she had requested in her final wishes. Family, close friends, a few longtime employees from Whitmore Furnishings. Douglas arrived with Natalie on his arm. She wore a black dress that was far too short for a funeral, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. Some of the older attendees gasped. Margaret looked like she wanted to throw something at them. I said nothing. I stood at the front of the church accepting condolences and sharing memories of Eleanor. I refused to let Douglas's disrespect overshadow his mother's farewell. Timothy flew in from San Francisco the night before the funeral. He hugged me tightly when he saw me, then turned and confronted his father. How could you bring her here? He demanded. To Grandma's funeral, Douglas shrugged and said Natalie was part of his life now, and people needed to accept it. Timothy did not speak to his father for the rest of the service. After the burial, Raymond Porter approached me quietly. He reminded me that the reading of Eleanor's will would take place in 1 week at his office. He suggested I prepare myself for what I asked. He just smiled slightly and walked away. That night, I found a small envelope tucked into the velvet box with the pearl bracelet. Eleanor must have hidden it there without telling me. Inside was a handwritten note on her personal stationery. My dearest Claudia, it read. You gave me love when my own son gave me nothing. You gave me your time, your energy, your heart. No matter what happens after I am gone, I want you to remember that your kindness was never wasted. I have made sure of that. When the time comes, trust in what I have done. You deserve everything. With all my love, Mother Eleanor. I read those words over and over until I had memorized every curve of her handwriting. She had called herself Mother Eleanor, not Mrs. Whitmore, not your mother-in-law. Mother. I fell asleep clutching that note to my chest, not knowing that everything was about to change. The day of the will reading arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in early November. Attorney Raymond Porter's office was located in a stately brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old money and older secrets. I arrived early, dressed simply in a navy blue dress and the pearl bracelet Eleanor had given me. Timothy came with me for support, his hand steady on my elbow as we walked inside. Douglas was already there when we entered the conference room. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table as if he already owned everything in it. Natalie sat beside him, scrolling through her phone with apparent boredom. Margaret arrived moments later, her Sunday best pressed and perfect. She nodded at me with a small smile before taking a seat near the window. Raymond entered last, carrying a leather folder that looked heavier than it should have been. He greeted everyone formally before settling into his chair at the opposite end of the table from Douglas. Before we begin, Raymond said, I want to clarify that this document represents the final and complete last will and testament of Eleanor Grace A. Whitmore, executed 3 months prior to her passing. Mrs. Whitmore was of sound mind and body at the time of signing, as verified by her physician and 2 independent witnesses. Douglas shifted impatiently. "Can we just get on with it?" Raymond ignored him and opened the folder. The preamble was standard legal language. Eleanor declared this to be her final will, revoking all previous versions. She expressed her wishes for cremation, which had already been fulfilled. She asked that her ashes be scattered in her rose garden, which I planned to do that weekend. Then came the bequests. To Margaret Helen Crawford, Raymond read for her 23 years of loyal service and friendship. Leave the sum of $50,000 free of any tax obligation. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. She looked at me in disbelief, and I smiled back at her. To my grandson Timothy Douglas, Whitmore Raymond continued, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be placed in an educational trust for his continued professional development or the education of his future children. Timothy squeezed my hand under the table. Douglas was growing visibly agitated now, his leg bouncing under the table. He clearly expected his portion to come next. Raymond paused, cleared his throat, and continued. The remainder of my estate, including all real property, financial assets, and business holdings, shall be distributed as follows. Douglas leaned forward eagerly. To my daughter-in-law, Claudia Marie Whitmore, I leave the entirety of my real estate holdings, including the primary residence at 1427 Maple Grove Lane, the rental property at 891 Oak Street, and the vacation home at 33 Lakeview Drive. Douglas's face went pale. What Raymond did not stop. Furthermore, to Claudia Marie Whitmore, I leave 100% of my ownership stake in Whitmore Furnishings Incorporated, including all stocks, bonds, intellectual property, and associated assets. Douglas shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That is impossible. That company belongs to my family. It belongs to me. Raymond looked at him calmly. Mr. Whitmore, I advise you to sit down and allow me to finish. This is fraud, Douglas shouted. She manipulated my mother. She took advantage of a dying woman. Timothy stood up to face his father. Sit down and shut up, he said quietly but firmly. Let him finish. Douglas looked around the room, wildly searching for an ally. Natalie had put down her phone and was staring at him with an expression that looked suspiciously like calculation. Margaret was openly smiling now. Raymond cleared his throat again and continued reading. This is a direct quote from Mrs. Whitmore's will. To my son Douglas Edward Whitmore, I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. Raymond continued, and I quote, Douglas, you have been given every advantage in life. I funded your education, gave you a position in the family business, and trusted you to carry on the Whitmore legacy. Instead, you chose to abandon your family in their time of greatest need. You betrayed your wife, who sacrificed 7 years of her life to care for me, while you pursued your own pleasures. I have watched Claudia bathe me when I could not bathe myself, feed me when my hands could not hold a spoon, and comfort me through countless sleepless nights. She has been more of a child to me than you have ever been. This is not punishment. This is justice. You have made your choices. Now live with them. Douglas collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen. Natalie was already gathering her purse, her eyes darting toward the door. Is this even legal? Douglas demanded. She was clearly not in her right mind. Raymond's response was measured. Mrs. Whitmore anticipated this challenge. Her will was witnessed by Dr. Hoffman, who will testify to her complete mental competency at the time of signing. Additionally, she provided a video deposition in which she explains her reasoning in detail. Any attempt to contest this will is highly unlikely to succeed and will result in significant legal fees that you will be required to pay. Douglas turned to me with hatred in his eyes. You did this. You poisoned her against me. I met his gaze steadily. I took care of her. That is all I did. If she made decisions based on what she observed, that is not my fault. Natalie stood up abruptly. I think I should go, she said, not meeting anyone's eyes. Douglas grabbed her arm. Where are you going? She pulled away from him. This is not what you told me it would be. You said you would inherit everything. You said we would be set for life. That is still my family's company, Douglas protested. I built that business, Raymond interjected. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, you managed the company as CEO, but you never owned any part of it. Your mother was the sole owner from the day your father passed until the day she died, and now Claudia is the sole owner. Natalie walked out without another word. Douglas sat there distraught, unable to comprehend how completely his plans had fallen apart. He had spent 2 years planning a new life with his mistress, waiting for his mother to die so he could claim his inheritance and cast me aside. And the whole time Eleanor had been watching, planning, ensuring that justice would be served. Raymond handed me a sealed envelope. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to give this to you personally after the reading. I took it with trembling hands. Timothy put his arm around my shoulders as Douglas stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Margaret came over and hugged me tightly. She knew, Margaret whispered. She knew everything, and she made it right. Later that evening, alone in Eleanor's sitting room, I opened the envelope Raymond had given me. My dearest daughter, the letter began. Yes, daughter, that is what you have been to me these past 7 years. Not a daughter-in-law bound to me only by your marriage to my son. A true daughter bound to me by love and sacrifice. By now you know what I have done. I hope you are not angry with me for keeping it secret. I needed Douglas to believe everything was normal until the end. If he had known my plans, he would have found ways to interfere. You gave me the most precious gift anyone can give. You gave me your time. You gave me your care. You gave me your presence when my own child could not be bothered to visit. You held my hand when I was afraid and read to me when I could not sleep. You became my family in the truest sense of the word. The company, the houses, the money. These are just things, but they are things I wanted you to have because you earned them. Not through manipulation or greed, but through simple, consistent, unwavering love. Live well, my daughter. Be happy. And know that wherever I am now, I am watching over you still. With all my love forever, Mother Eleanor. I pressed the letter to my heart and wept not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for a woman who had seen me when no one else did. The weeks following the will reading were chaotic, but I navigated them with a clarity I did not know I possessed. Douglas hired 3 different attorneys to contest the will. Each one reviewed the documentation and reached the same conclusion. Eleanor's will was ironclad. The video deposition, the medical records, the witness testimonies. Everything was in perfect order. Any legal challenge would be expensive, lengthy, and almost certainly unsuccessful. 2 weeks after his last attorney gave him the bad news, Douglas called me for the first time since storming out of Raymond's office. His voice was different. Gone was the arrogance, the entitlement, the cold dismissiveness. In its place was something I had never heard from him before. Desperation. Claudia, please, he said. You have to understand. That company is my life. I have dedicated 30 years to building it. You cannot just take it away from me. I did not take anything. I replied calmly. Your mother gave it to me. There is a difference. He tried flattery. He reminded me of our early years together, how happy we had been, how much we had meant to each other. He suggested we could work something out. Maybe I could keep the houses and give him back the company. Maybe we could be partners. When flattery failed, he tried guilt. He said I was destroying his life, his career, his future. He said I would have nothing without his family's name, that I owed everything I had to being a Whitmore. That was when I found my voice. Let me be clear, I said firmly. I owe nothing to the Whitmore name. I spent 7 years of my life caring for your mother while you were too busy sleeping with your secretary to visit her. I bathed her, fed her, held her through her worst nights. I was there when you were not. And now you want to talk about what I owe. Douglas went silent. Your mother saw everything, I continued. She saw how you treated her. She saw how you treated me. And she made her decision based on what she witnessed. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at yourself. I hung up before he could respond. A few days later, I received news through Timothy that Natalie had left Douglas completely. Apparently, when she discovered that the baby she was carrying was not actually his, she decided there was no longer any reason to stay. The father was some fitness instructor from her gym. Douglas was left with nothing. He had to sell the apartment he had been renting because he could no longer afford it. Last I heard, he was staying with an old college friend and working as a part-time business consultant, a far cry from the CEO position he once held. I did not feel satisfaction at his downfall. What I felt was closer to pity. He had been given everything in life: love, opportunity, family, success, and he had thrown it all away for temporary pleasures and selfish desires. Meanwhile, I had work to do. My first day at Whitmore Furnishings was intimidating. I walked into the headquarters building that Eleanor had entered thousands of times before me, trying to channel her confidence. The board of directors was skeptical, and I did not blame them. I had no business degree, no corporate experience, no background in furniture manufacturing. All I had was a nursing license and 7 years of caregiver experience. But I also had something else. I had Raymond Porter's guidance, Margaret's unwavering support, and most importantly, I had the humility to know what I did not know. I hired an experienced operations director named Patricia Chen to handle the day-to-day management. I spent my first 3 months listening and learning, attending meetings, reviewing financial reports, asking questions that probably seemed basic to the seasoned executives. What I discovered was troubling. Under Douglas's leadership, the company had accumulated significant debt. There were unfavorable contracts with suppliers, bloated expenses for executive perks, and several questionable investments that had never paid off. Working with Patricia and the financial team, we developed a restructuring plan. We renegotiated supplier contracts, eliminated unnecessary expenses, and refocused the company on its core strengths. It was painful work that required difficult decisions about staffing and priorities. But slowly things began to turn around. By the 6-month mark, Whitmore Furnishings was operating in the black again for the first time in 3 years. Employee morale improved as they saw genuine leadership instead of neglect. Longtime workers told me they appreciated that someone was finally paying attention. One older foreman named Robert pulled me aside after a factory tour. He said Mrs. Eleanor would be proud of what I was doing. He said she always worried about what would happen to the company after she was gone. His words meant more to me than any profit report. Throughout this transition, Timothy was my rock. He decided to relocate from San Francisco back to Connecticut, taking a position at a local architecture firm so he could be closer to me. I tried to encourage him to maintain some relationship with his father despite everything. Douglas was still his dad, and I did not want Timothy to carry that burden of estrangement forever. But Timothy was firm. He said he had seen who his father really was during those final months with Eleanor. A man who could abandon his dying mother and betray his wife was not someone Timothy wanted in his life. I understood. Some wounds take a long time to heal. Some never heal completely. As for Douglas, I saw him once more about 8 months after the will reading. I was leaving a restaurant downtown when I spotted him sitting alone at a bus stop across the street. He looked older than his 56 years. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture defeated. He was staring at nothing in particular, lost in thoughts I could only imagine. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. I did not feel triumph or vindication. I felt the profound sadness of wasted potential. Douglas could have had everything: a loving wife, a close relationship with his son, a mother who adored him, a successful business. Instead, he chose a path that led him to a bus stop on a cold afternoon alone. I walked to my car without looking back. Some chapters need to close completely before new ones can begin. A year has passed since Eleanor left us, and I am finally beginning to feel like myself again. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. It was surprisingly simple once Douglas realized he had no leverage. I kept the properties Eleanor had left me, and he kept his personal belongings. There was nothing else to divide. I started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of everything that happened, the betrayal, the loss, the sudden transformation of my entire life. Dr. Patterson helped me understand that healing is not a destination, but a journey. There are good days and difficult days, and both are part of the process. I also joined a meditation group at the community center. At first, I felt awkward sitting in silence with strangers, but gradually I found peace in the practice. I learned to quiet the anxious voices in my head, to breathe through moments of pain, to find stillness in the chaos. Caroline, my friend from my nursing days, reconnected with me after hearing about what happened. We started meeting for coffee every Sunday, catching up on years of missed conversations. She became a source of wisdom and humor when I needed both. I also started painting again. It was something I had loved in my 20s, but abandoned when life got too busy with marriage and motherhood. Eleanor had a beautiful sunroom in the mansion that I converted into an art studio. I spend hours there now, capturing landscapes and flowers and whatever else catches my eye. One of my paintings hangs in the main office at Whitmore Furnishings. It is a portrait of Eleanor based on a photograph from her wedding day. She looks so young and hopeful in it, full of dreams for the future. I wanted everyone at the company to remember the woman who built this legacy. The foundation I established in Eleanor's name has become one of my greatest sources of purpose. The Eleanor Whitmore Caregiver Support Fund provides financial assistance and counseling services to people who have left their careers to care for family members. I know firsthand how isolating and exhausting that role can be. I know how easy it is to lose yourself in the process of caring for someone else. I wanted to create something that would honor Eleanor's memory while helping others who are walking the same path I walked. The foundation hosted its first gala last month. Over 300 people attended, raising nearly $200,000 for caregiver support programs. Timothy gave a speech about his grandmother and what she meant to our family. There was not a dry eye in the room. My relationship with Margaret has deepened into genuine friendship. She still works at the mansion, though her role has shifted. She is less of a housekeeper now and more of a companion, someone who knew Eleanor intimately and can share memories and stories that keep her spirit alive. We often sit in the garden together on warm afternoons, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. Margaret tells me that Eleanor would be so happy to see how things have turned out. I hope she is right. As for Megan's relationship with Douglas, time has created some distance from the intense emotions of the past year. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually found a job managing a small furniture store on the outskirts of Hartford. A far cry from CEO of Whitmore Furnishings, but at least he is working. I do not hate Douglas anymore. Hatred is exhausting, and it only poisons the person carrying it. What I feel now is closer to indifference mixed with occasional moments of sadness for what could have been. Eleanor taught me that forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You can release someone from your heart without inviting them back into your life. That distinction has been crucial to my healing. Timothy has started spending more time with me on weekends. We cook dinner together, watch old movies, and talk about his work and his dreams. He is dating a lovely woman named Sophia, whom I absolutely adore. I have a feeling wedding bells might be in their future. When I think about what I have learned from this entire experience, a few things stand out. First, your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Douglas's betrayal said everything about him and nothing about me. I spent too many years measuring my value by his attention and approval. That was a mistake I will never make again. Second, kindness is never wasted, even when it seems unappreciated. I cared for Eleanor because I loved her, not because I expected anything in return. The fact that she chose to reward my care does not diminish the purity of my intentions. It simply proves that goodness has a way of finding its way back to you. Third, it is never too late to start over. At 54 years old, I became a business owner, a philanthropist, and a painter. I found new friends, rediscovered old passions, and built a life that feels authentically mine for the first time in decades. And finally, the people who truly see us are rare and precious. Eleanor saw me when Douglas was too busy looking elsewhere. She valued my presence when her own son could not be bothered to show up. Her love and her final gift were not charity. They were recognition of something she believed I deserved. One evening recently, I visited Eleanor's grave to lay fresh flowers. I sat on the bench nearby and talked to her as I often do. I told her about the company's latest quarterly results. I told her about Timothy and Sophia. I told her about the Caregiver Foundation and how many people it has helped. I told her that I finally feel happy again. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed with a text from Timothy. It said simply, "I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything." I smiled up at the sky, imagining Eleanor watching from somewhere beyond. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me, for believing in me, for making sure I was taken care of." The sun was setting as I walked back to my car, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that makes you stop and appreciate being alive. Eleanor once told me that life has a way of balancing itself out, that the universe keeps track of kindness and cruelty and eventually settles the accounts. I did not believe her at the time. I thought she was just being optimistic. But now, standing in the life she helped create for me, I understand what she meant. Justice does not always come quickly. Sometimes it takes years to arrive. But it comes, it finds a way, and sometimes it comes from the most unexpected source. An elderly woman with trembling hands and a fierce love for someone who was not even her blood. A mother in every way that mattered. If you are watching this and you are in a situation where you feel unseen and unappreciated, please know that your efforts matter. Someone is watching, even if it is not the person you expect. Your kindness is not invisible even when it seems that way. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone who did not deserve it? Have you ever been saved by someone you least expected? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their kindness matters. Thank you for spending this time with me today. May you find people in your life who see your worth and love you for exactly who you are. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.